So today I'm going to discuss the 2024 Washington State Republican Convention that happened just over this last weekend. I'm going to give you my opinion on a few aspects that I don't think have been discussed by others so much. And then I hope to discuss some of the overall highlights, why I believe it matters, how it may impact the primary elections in August, and of course the general election in November. Now, there's really a lot to cover, and if you believe that I missed something or that I'm completely wrong about anything, just leave your comments down below. Despite graduating from Columbia University, I'm not a leftist, so I can actually accept and enjoy different opinions. Now, before I dive into the details, I want to just remind my viewers that I hold no important role in the Washington State Republican Party. Sure, I'm an elected precinct committee officer, just like thousands of others, and I do volunteer to MC for various Lincoln Day dinners around the state, and I'm often invited to speak at many of them. But mostly, I'm just a volunteer. I'm also not officially endorsing anyone yet in most of these positions at this time, and mainly this is because I want to be able to report clearly and objectively on what I've witnessed and share that information with you. Now, I always have people contact me after these videos from all of the campaigns, usually complaining that I missed some aspect of their candidate's resume, or I was not appropriately sympathetic enough, or maybe not harsh enough on the other guy. Now, that's fair enough. I'm doing my best to report what I believe is going on, and I'm happy to hear from campaigns, but once the video is launched, I really can't go back and change it. And my obligation is more to you, my viewers, more than it is to any politician or party. Now, obviously, I don't speak or pretend to speak for the Republican Party. Sometimes I agree with what they do, sometimes I'm a critic, but I hope always to be pushing the clear and obvious agenda of restoring our freedom and liberty from the abuse of our current government. And I hope to encourage others to work towards a better tomorrow for future generations by promoting a freedom and liberty agenda. Okay, so let's just get into the convention itself. I've not been a big Republican Party convention attendee over the years, although I have this year's delegates pass, right, which looks like this if you want to see it right here. Every delegate to the convention has to wear one, and this is only the third state convention that I've actually attended in some manner over the past 15 years or so. So my perspective is probably limited compared to somebody who's attended multiple decades of these events. However, for me, this one was very different because I came not just as a PCO, but I was also a volunteer, temporarily appointed chair for the 3rd Congressional District Caucus meeting, which I'll get into later in this video. And I'll also point out that for the majority of attendees, and really the vast majority of them here this time, this was actually their first in-person convention. So that probably contributes to some of the results that we saw over the weekend. Now, I want to emphasize to everyone watching this video that there basically was one critical difference between the 2024 Washington State Republican Convention and the state party conventions of the past. And this was primarily the fact that for the first time ever, the Washington State Republican Party was trying to engage the grassroots and the PCOs from around the state in this process of endorsing candidates before filing week in May and well before the primary election time in August. Now, I know I've discussed this before, but it is worth saying again. The purpose of this endorsement process and this objective was not a conspiracy, nor was it hidden. It was actually spelled out very clearly, loud and openly, for about 6 months now because the Washington State Republican Party was trying to ensure that at least one of their candidates would make it through the primary and be in the general election. Now, this has been a real concern over the past 20 years or so, as more and more frequently the Republican Party has traditionally been very hands-off in the early stages of candidates filing for office. And there have been repeated examples of a free-for-all process that has produced large waves of candidates who fled the zone for some critical political positions. Now, this would basically normally not be a problem, but with Washington State's top 2 jungle primary, which has been the law of the state now for over 20 years, the mechanics of this process fail when too many Republican or Republican-leaning candidates run marginally adequate enough campaigns to just split the vote and then ensure that the final 2 political candidates who make it through the primary are both Looney Tune Democrats. Now, this scenario results in no good choices on the November ballot, and this has happened in the Washington State Secretary of State race, the Lieutenant Governor's race, the 10th Congressional District race, and the 47th Legislative District race, just to name a few recently. And if you don't understand Washington State's top 2 jungle primary process, just go to my video that I produced a few years ago on this subject, which I have linked down below again. And now listen, it doesn't matter if some of these candidates are running because they had a vision from God, they're on an ego-driven vanity project, they want to pad their resume or cross the experience off their bucket list, or maybe even if they understandably feel that they can do better than the insane, crazy leftists currently occupying that office today. The end result has often been the same. They essentially cancel each other out, splitting up the Republican-conservative vote, and then, of course, the math doesn't lie. And everyone, including the voters and the state, lose because we end up with 2 crazy, insane leftists on the ballot in November. So this endorsement process, which the Republican Party, basically, they used at this year's state convention, that has some processes and procedures that need to be kind of cleaned up and refined and fixed. But the objective and the goal itself is not wrong, corrupt, nor is it crazy. The execution can be greatly improved, however, and I'll try to discuss some practical suggestions that I have along those lines as well. However, this is the first time in state history that this has been done, and for the first time out, despite the wailing and gnashing of teeth, it generally worked out okay. Far from perfect, of course, and many are always going to be disappointed with specific results. But however, let's just get into this and explain what happened. Now, let's discuss first the high drama of the Washington State Republican Party convention endorsement of Semi Bird for Washington State governor. This is the primary topic that dominated all the news coverage of the conference because it did involve more drama and theatrics than really any other aspect of the convention. And essentially, there are only 2 Republican candidates going into the primary election so far. It is always possible somebody else could jump in at the last minute before filing week, but right now there are only 2. It's Semi Bird, who's been running for this office since late 2022, and Dave Reichert, who launched his campaign last year. Now, I believe Semi Bird's campaign strategy of working the Lincoln Day circuit for years in advance and pushing for early local county party endorsements clearly paid off at the convention just this weekend. I mean, listen, I have been active speaking at Republican County Party events for 15 years now. I go all over the state, and I usually do roughly about 20 of these a year. And I've seen Semi working the circuit effectively now for about 18 months. So Semi Bird is a good, dynamic public speaker, and he knows how to work the grassroots in a very traditional and classic way. Now, essentially, between the early endorsements and recruitment of PCOs and activists to come to the 2024 Republican Washington State Convention, this early investment in recruitment very clearly paid off. Most of the nearly 2,000 delegates who attended the convention were obviously Bird supporters. Now, this doesn't happen by accident. This actually takes some effort and planning, particularly if you put in the time in advance. The Reichert campaign did not take this step as seriously, and even though there were hundreds of vacancies, there actually could have been another 400 plus delegates. Presumably, the Reichert campaign could have maybe put in at least a more aggressive effort and recruited more supporters for these vacant slots. I'll also point out that there were actually about 380 delegates who signed up. They actually paid to be there, but they never showed up. Now, there's no way of knowing how they would have voted, and since they didn't show up, they didn't matter. Now, this campaign failure, I believe, was perhaps the result of a tactical decision to ignore the process, but it seems like an unwise campaign tactic to me and a forced error on the Reichert side of his campaign for governor. So, okay, this is just politics 101 here. It's no surprise. The person who actually brings the most supporters wins the vote. It's sort of like an old school in-person election. So, however, this is really not the real drama. The drama actually came out because the Washington State Republican Party has a candidate vetting process and a committee that verifies and vets the prospective candidates for public office. This actually is not unusual, and nor is that a conspiracy either. Most state parties actually do this. This committee is obligated, of course, to verify that the candidate's actually a Republican and in general alignment with the party platform. Not conformity necessarily, but fairly close. Now, secondly, they usually look into a candidate's background and were they in prison, for example? Do they have a criminal record? Are they a pedophile? Or worse, did they join Antifa or some other leftist hate crew for a time? Now, just some basic background is done to make sure that the party isn't embarrassed to have that candidate wear their label. So the candidate vetting committee felt that the Byrd campaign was not honest with them and attempted to conceal historic criminal records from them. And this really came out of a recent Seattle Times article that discussed just some issues from Byrd's past, mainly having to do with the 1993 misdemeanor conviction. Now, they believed that the Byrd campaign lied to them because of this fact. Not so much the violation, but probably more because they felt they were lied to, that this committee recommended that the Washington State Republican Party no longer use the convention to endorse Byrd. Now, when only 2 candidates have been vetted, this essentially throws the endorsement by default to Dave Reichert. But there were hundreds of PCOs and activists who had paid to go to this convention and endorse their candidate, Semi Byrd. And they clearly were the majority of the attendees. So they overturned this vetting committee ruling from the convention floor and reinstated Byrd as one of the approved governor candidates. Now, Dave Reichert was reportedly en route to the convention, but as the rules seemed to change, as they did from the floor, he publicly divorced himself from the whole process and attempted to withdraw his name from the endorsement list. Now, listen, both camps are going to spin the story to the benefit of their supported candidate, and I get that. That is politics. However, the fact is that the Republican Party endorsed Semi Byrd for governor before filing week. That's what they did this weekend. So last year, for my regular viewers, I was actually able to interview Semi Byrd, and that interview, again, is also linked down below if you want to see it. And I am hoping at some point to interview Reichert as well, hopefully in the near future. I've offered to do this to his campaign, but it has yet to happen. Now, before I get to the other candidates and faces, let me explain a few things about the governor's race at this time. The Democrats have essentially lined up behind AG Bob Ferguson for governor. Now, Mark Mullet's run as a Democrat, but he's really unlikely to survive the primary at this point in time, unless there's some just radical change between now and filing week in May, or just a shocking event before August. I would expect that a Republican will survive the primary in this race and be on the November ballot. Now, who will it be? That's hard to say because right now, but we'll have to see. I mean, the Reichert campaign had committed to run no matter what happened at the convention quite some time ago. So their lack of effort to recruit PCOs or activists for the convention was probably indicative of the strategy from the beginning. The Reichert's campaign has raised over $2.5 million so far. And while this is actually $4 million less than Ferguson at this point, it still puts them ahead of any other Republican campaign for governor. Now, this is pre-filing week since at least 2012, so they're literally raising more money than any Republican has raised in the state for governor since 2012 at this point in time. Now, as long as this money actually goes to voter contact and not enriching the consultant class, this strategy could actually mean something in August. The Byrd campaign did quite well, I think, to pack the state convention with their supporters, and they got the Washington State Republican Party endorsement. That mission was clearly accomplished. The challenge for this campaign will now be for them to pivot towards wider voter contact outside of preaching to the choir. Now, this does take money, and right now they don't have much. Now, I know people will say that the money isn't everything. And this is true, but it is a critical part of support and, of course, marketing of the candidates. To pretend otherwise is just not honest. If Semi was sitting right here next to me right now, I think he would agree with that he basically has to raise more money in order to capitalize on this weekend's success. There should be some wind in the Byrd campaign sails, but with no money to move on from this victory, it will be difficult to fully capitalize on this weekend's success. Now, this simply becomes a campaign foot race, and it will basically, the turnout effort from now until the August primary is going to be what makes a difference. I'm going to caution all those, however, who are involved in either campaign, including many of my viewers out there watching this video. If you want to win in November, calling each other names and personal attacks on each other, it's not going to help you. Because here's the reality. The people that you're attacking today are the very ones that you're going to need after August to get across the finish line in November, regardless of who comes out of the August primary. Okay, so now back to the convention. The other statewide races included easy party endorsements, essentially, in the state attorney general's race and the state auditor's race, where only one person was asking for an endorsement, and they essentially cruised forward with formal state party endorsements in these positions. Pete Serrano here, who we've discussed in a previous video about the AG's race, and then Matt Hawkins from Spokane, who's an activist that I know pretty well from years past, who's actually running for state auditor. These guys easily cruised to simple endorsements. Now, the party had no candidates to consider for the insurance commissioner, the state treasurer, or the lieutenant governor's race, which is kind of a shame. So these races didn't even actually come up during the main convention, although I'm actually certain that candidates will late file, of course, and then get into these races by mid-May. They just didn't come up at this endorsement convention right now. Now, the Public Lands Commissioner race has 2 Republicans in it right now, and this was another position for which there was some drama from the convention floor. Now, I'll try to cover this race in a future video, so I don't want to outline all the dynamics here right now, but this is a race where the Democrats may be splitting themselves up so much that they may split their own vote so that they could potentially anyway, hand the November election to 2 Republicans, in theory. Now, the endorsed candidate was Sue Peterson, who lost a race for this very same position in 2020 with 43% of the vote and kind of an anemic campaign war chest at the time of $73,000. The other Republican running for this office is former 3rd District Congressional Congresswoman, actually, Jamie Herrera Butler. Now, Herrera Butler has raised over $300,000 so far, and she's actually keeping a fundraising pace with the leading Democrats in the race. But she lost her congressional seat in 2022 in the primary largely because of blowback against her vote to impeach Trump. Now, that has not been forgotten by the attendees of this convention, and during her speech, many of them actually stood up and faced away from her during her speech. Despite that drama, they were actually booing as well. Both Herrera and Butler and Sue Peterson will be running in August, and the voters will ultimately basically determine who comes out of the scrum at this time, but Peterson did get the endorsement. Now, the superintendent of public instruction race is probably the one where the endorsement process had the greatest impact. I produced a video about this race just a few weeks ago, and it was a crowded field. It still is on the conservative-leaning side of the spectrum against currently very unpopular incumbent Democrat Chris Reichel. Now, David Olson actually easily got the party endorsement, and even though this is a nonpartisan position on the ballot, essentially, Chad Magendas, who is one of the competitors, he's already announced that he's going to follow his pledge to resign and support the chosen candidate. And it's likely there may be at least one other that does the same thing. So the endorsement process winnows down some of the conservative candidates so that at least statistically one of them is probably going to survive the primary in August and then be on the November ballot. Now, this endorsement was another example, by the way, of a candidate seriously working the Lincoln Day dinners and the county conventions all around the state. I saw David Olson out there in person at many of these conventions and meetings around the state. So clearly this effort paid off for him at the state convention. Now, the last position was the Secretary of State's position. There were 3 Republicans in this race running for this position and asking for party endorsement. You had political newcomer Dale Whitaker from Spokane, and he's the one who actually got the endorsement. You also had 31st Legislative District State Senator Phil Fortunato, who was probably the closest contender for this position. And then you had Snohomish County Republican Chair Bob Hageland, or former chair, who has frequently run for office. And they were all in consideration. Now, I also plan to kind of produce a video outlining this race soon before the primary. Now, the only statewide federal race is the state Senate seat, really, and the federal Senate seat. And Raul Garcia from the Tri-Cities also won just a pretty smooth and very simple endorsement for this position. Now, the state delegates also broke, basically on Saturday, the state delegates also broke into 10 different meetings on Friday to take kind of formal votes for the delegates to the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee this July. These breakout sessions were organized geographically by congressional district, and Washington State has 10 congressional districts. I was temporarily appointed to be chair of the 3rd Congressional District, which is Southwest Washington. And one of the reasons that I was temporarily appointed to this position, just to get it kicked off, was because I'm actually not planning to go to the National Convention, and I wasn't running for any delegate position. our district had already officially endorsed Joe Kent as the Republican candidate for this position before the state party had enacted the current rules for endorsement. So I believe actually our district meeting was probably one of the less contentious meetings on Saturday. We had over 218 delegates in attendance there with other guests, and it really went smoothly and openly with just a lot of people vying for slots for the national convention. Now, interestingly, I think, at least to me, the Trump presidential campaign came to the state convention very well prepared this year, far more prepared than they were in 2020 and 2016. There were slate card handouts, and I got an example of one. This is what it looks like right here, which outlines basically recommended and vetted endorsed slates of delegates by congressional district and for at-large positions. Now, this is how a serious and well-organized presidential campaign should do it. You can see it, I put some up here too. This has helped, it really did help a lot of these newcomers kind of make their choices when they might have been otherwise confused. I thought that the Trump campaign was well organized in this part of the process, and this is particularly impressive considering that Washington State is probably considered a national backwater when compared to the battleground or the larger states out there. Not every Trump delegate was approved, of course, but most of them were. So the Trump campaign even updated their slate list after Friday for the Saturday votes on at-large options. And they distributed these to convention attendees, I thought, pretty effectively. Really, from what I can tell, the only seriously very contentious Republican district endorsement process was the 5th Congressional District, which includes most of eastern Washington anyway, including Spokane. And this was because of long-term Congresswoman, Cathy McMorris Rodgers. She was stepping down, so the primary kind of looked like it was going to be this chaotic food fight with 10 Republican candidates jumping into the race. Now, in the end, the Trump-endorsed candidate, Brian Dansel, right here, former Ferry County Commissioner and part of the Trump administration from a few years ago, he managed on the second round of balloting to actually get the endorsements. There are 2 candidates, though, who I believe are going to still stay in the running for this congressional seat, at least as far as I can tell right now. 7th Legislative District Representative Maycomber and Spokane County Treasurer and former State Senator Baumgartner. Now, Maycomber got the second most votes by the local activists this weekend, about maybe a third as many as Dansel. So it's not close, but at least she was in second place. But she also has almost 10 times as much cash raised, not quite, but close to it, with $139,000 compared to $16,000 reported for Dansel. Now, Baumgartner has raised over $400,000 so far, and from what I can tell, all 3 of these folk are probably continuing to run through at least through the August primary, regardless of the party endorsement. Now, I'll do a future video on the congressional candidates around the state, so I'm going to go into more detail at that time for the 3rd, which is where I live, the 4th, and the 5th, of course, and other districts around the state. But it was this 5th congressional district, basically, that really had the zone flooded with candidates. Now, I'll make another point before I get into some suggestions and final thoughts on the convention. It should be noted that the state party convention finished approving their state party platform before the convention came to an end. And this was the first time, actually, so believe it or not, in many years, that they were able to do this. Normally, they just run out the clock and they can't finish it. Now, I want to give strong kudos to Julianne McMahon out of Kitsap County, and she's actually a former coworker of mine from my Freedom Foundation days, because she ran that part of the convention process, in my opinion, very professionally, very efficiently, and she deserves the credit for making this happen. Now then, let me close with kind of some suggestions, mostly process and planning suggestions for the next convention that they run presumably 4 years from now. Now, first of all, the parking in Spokane for the convention center was a challenge, and it might be better to have a venue where parking's more plentiful and easier to get to, since so many attendees will need to attend from all over the state. I also thought that the security lines were too long, and although I'm not sure the organizers could actually control this, the Spokane convention actually required this because of an Antifa threat that was actually made against the convention this year during this time. So Spokane, the convention, essentially the venue, overruled the Washington State Republican Party, and they required these security screening steps and a single entrance to the convention. So since the left is always violent and always threatens violence, it could be, probably was wise to kind of plan accordingly. And it might be even wiser to plan accordingly in the future and make sure that you have basically more security lines in place next time to facilitate kind of a larger traffic problem and prevent it from getting too funneled down. Now, this would have been particularly problematic if the convention had actually had the extra 850 delegates who actually would have attended this year in addition to the people who actually showed up. So it would have been tougher, and it would have been even worse. And then, of course, for future planning, I just suggest that they manage that venue, whatever that venue is, accordingly. Now, I'm not extremely critical of some of these shortfalls because I realize that most of these people are volunteers. And it has been 8 years, actually, since the state party has organized an in-person event like this. 2020 was actually done via Zoom, right in the middle of the COVID drama. I didn't even attend it. And I realize that a lot of experienced people have retired in that time, or they're no longer available to help with the planning and the prep. But a new generation is involved, and then some of these critiques, I hope, can help. I am critical about how the floor was organized by county delegation. They really needed to have pre-planned kind of the delegate seating by county just a bit more effectively, with just large signs clearly indicating each county location on the floor, big ones, so that people can see. And I also suspect that they should use some type of scanner at the delegate door entrances because this will better confirm true quorum counts and then a clear physical delineation between guests who can't sit on the floor with the delegates and obviously can't vote, and then the press, and then, of course, the attendees themselves. You can easily put a scanner on the back of this, on this ID. Now, this would have eliminated some confusion, I think, that occurred at different times during some of the procedural votes. Not mission critical, but still it would be beneficial. I believe that better preparation for the counts on the floor, for the endorsements and the delegate selection could be done quite a bit more efficiently just with a larger selection of predetermined counters and observers. Now, this is a manually intensive process, and the party can do this in a much quicker and more efficient way if the practical planning on some of the more mundane parts of the convention are planned out just a bit more in advance. Rather than just having 25 assigned to counting the ballots, they should probably look at 60 or more and then organize them in just teams of 10. I also suspect some more clarity on the rules for round-robin voting on the congressional district breakout sessions, and then some effort to communicate just basic familiarity with Robert Rules of Order for new attendees who may not be familiar with some of the procedural processes. I think that this would actually smooth things out. When you're just dealing with this huge type of crowd of 2,000 people, if you don't have some basic decorum and rules, then it becomes a little more than just time-wasting shouting contest. There was a little bit of that there over the weekend, but I really thought Chairman Walsh did quite well during some of the more challenging stages of this process. If you disagree with me on this, that's fine, and I have to tell you, this is not an easy position to be in, and most people would have done much worse in that position, and very few would be able to do better. Now, finally, they really needed about 3 coffee stands in the main lobby area, and I know this is kind of funny, but it bothers me when I see this. More than just this one, you can see the photo of just the line that went completely out of sight at periodic times while I was there. And I realize this is just part of the challenge of the venue, but it was crazy to have just a handful of people working a limited coffee stand with 2,000 or more people spending that much time there for multiple days. If you were there in Spokane this weekend, just leave your comments or thoughts down below. And I particularly appreciate the feedback, and very particularly, I want to hear what you disagree with me on, or what you believe that I missed, or what should be done next time. Because listen, the media reports will always exaggerate the dissent and ignore anything that works well. That's just what they do in Washington state, and it is unrealistic to expect anything else. If you only read the Seattle Times for your information, well, you'll never know much about what is happening out there. However, despite the challenges, drama, and initial outcome of this year's state Republican convention, there is really only one big question that the state Republican Party will need to answer. And frankly, I don't think that they're going to have an answer until at least after the August primary is completed, or possibly until after the November election results. And that big question is whether or not they should take the risk of having an endorsement convention like they just had. For all the drama, will it help winnow the field so that Republicans don't self-immolate in mathematically challenged, unrealistic ego and vanity fights by flooding the primaries? For the answer to that question, we really will have to wait for August and possibly November to have our final answer. For those of you who attended the state convention, you had an impact whether you believe you did or not. You certainly had more of an impact than the people who didn't bother to show up. Because showing up is the first step to changing the future. Because, as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up.